All right, welcome to Friday Read-Alouds at noon. Every Friday, we'll probably go on for the next 2 Fridays and then wrap it up. Summer reading is still happening. It will be going on till our Monday nights anyway. Our family fun nights, sponsored by the Friends, will be happening up until August 10th, and I wanted to talk about 2 of them really quickly. Next week, we're having, this coming Monday, August 3rd, we're having a pet party. All the information is available on the children's page at www.sopl.org. Or you can look at the Twitter feed every day and see all the other events that are happening at the library. We're open 5 days a week now. We really miss everybody, so come on in. So the pet party is going to be Zoom virtual. All the information is available, as I said, on the children's page about how to Zoom in. And we'd like you to show us your pets and talk about how your pets are handling the pandemic and how you're handling your pets during the pandemic. And we'll be here. We'll make it festive and fun. I'll read some stories, and we always sing to Ruby happy birthday, and hopefully she'll be able to join us. Okay, the other quickly want to talk about, we're having a talent show. That's our wrap up on Monday night, August 10th. Again, all the information is available on the homepage, www.sopl.org, and click on the children's page. So we're going to have a Zoom virtual talent show. Everybody is welcome. Music, spoken word, dance, magic, acting, comedy. You need to let us know what your talent is. It'll have to be performed in 5 minutes or less. There will be prizes. And even if you don't have a talent that you feel like sharing, please Zoom in and watch the talent that we do have at South Orange, which we have a lot of. This is our 3rd annual talent show, so please Zoom in. Okay, so I'm going to read from Guys Read Again, a different one by Jon Scieszka. Well, gathered by Jon Scieszka in 1 volume, and he has gathered stories, asked different authors, popular authors, to contribute to this collection of short stories. And today is by Shannon Hale, who does a lot of graphic novels, and it's called Bouncing the Grinning Goat. All right, let's get started. This is from Other Worlds. So each of these stories, this book is available at the library for checkout. And we are open, as I said, 5 days a week, so come on in. So this is going to be from a world that is not familiar to ours right now, but what is familiar to us now? When I staggered into the town, I hadn't eaten in 3 days. My big brother's armor pressed heavy on my shoulders. His sword hung long from my belt, scraping the ground. I tripped over it, fell face first into a mud puddle, and wondered, if I just lay here, how long would it take me to die? The noon sun's heat on my back felt like a pat of encouragement. I found the energy to crawl back to my feet and stumble on past houses, cobblers, and weavers, following the maddening smell of food. A tavern. Its carved wooden sign bore a smiling goat. Good morning, sir, I croaked at a short brown man who was nailing a paper to the door. I was about to ask, that is big for a scrap of food, when I read the notice he'd nailed up. Bouncer wanted. A bouncer is somebody who has to take care of unruly patrons. A bouncer? If the job included meals, I could be a bouncer. Keep the cavern goers in line, stop fights, toss out the troublemakers. After all, I looked after my 9 little brothers and sisters, or I had anyway, before I ran away. I'd like to be your bouncer, I said. I know I don't look like much at the moment. I tried to scrape the mud off my face. But I have excellent bouncer experience. Said the owner. A stranger might work better than one of their own telling them what to do. His voice was surprisingly high, like a morning bird's screech. But what makes you think you could bounce my tavern any better than the last fellow? What makes me think? I made my face indignant. What makes me think? The wind shifted. blowing rich scents from the tavern kitchen, charred beef, bacon grease, milky potato stew, oat muffins. My stomach shrank one more size. Just then, I'd have said anything to get fed. But the first solution that popped into my mind was, I'm from Old Hollow. The little man blinked twice and took a step back. Hollow? Oh my. He rubbed his hands together. I looked everywhere but my face. Yes, an old hollower? Yes, that'll do. Oh my, yes. He didn't ask for proof. After all, who would dare falsely claim to be an old hollower? The twisting of my thin stomach took up so much of my attention, I didn't feel guilty yet, because I was actually from New Hollow, which is just down the mountain and on the other side of the wood. But we shared the same stream, so that sort of counted, didn't it? No, it didn't. I'd never seen an old hollower, but I'd heard the tales. They fought with swords forged of hot light. Their eyes burned like fire to see through lies. They turned into living flame and chase away their enemies. New Hollowers like me were pretty normal, boring folk. Welcome to Bendy Stream, said the little man. I'm Churn. What's your name? My big brothers all got warrior names like Forge, Strike, and Tackle, while I got Spark. It sounded like something you would just swat away, a firefly or a flitting ash. I suppose it could have been worse. My little sisters were named Ponder, Silence, Listen, and Behave. By the way, Behave was the naughtiest 4-year-old in the 5 kingdoms. I tried to sound casual as I said, now about meals. You could eat after work, said Churn. My belly made a pathetic squeak. Inside, the tavern was smoky from the hearth fire and as dark as evening. At this time of day, our little tavern back home would be mostly empty, but the Grinning Goat was half full of people eating their noon meal. The salty scent of meat made me wobble. I was so hungry. I grabbed a back of a chair. It'd be hard to look fearsome while in a dead faint. Hey! Churn screeched. Hey! The talking and clanking died down. He adjusted his apron. You all know what happened to my last bouncer, rest his soul, though maybe only one of you knows exactly how he ended up in that ditch. The last bouncer was dead? My legs tried to fold beneath me. But you never mind, because my new bouncer isn't going to put up with your fighting and thieving and accumulation of excessive meal tabs. This one is from Old Hollower. The silence got silenter. Please feed me, I wanted to beg, but I guess that tactic would get me tossed out the door. I needed to convince him that I was an Old Hollower. I did have some practice in storytelling, because the little ones wouldn't go to sleep without a good story. Greetings, Bendy Stream, I said. I am Mistress Spark. My stomach let out a groan so loud it could have been a dragon snore. I tried to cover it with a cough. As you can see, I'm young, and the power of young hollowers are still raw. If I were forced to fight you, I might hurt you terribly. So let's just avoid fighting at all costs. Thank you. Someone whispered, that little girl is a hollower? Looks more like a half-drowned rat than a mage, someone else whispered. So let's all be nice, I said, not as grandly. If you don't mind, please. I put my shaking hands in my pockets and gripped my lucky rock. Hey, Blaze, I heard a man whisper. I dare you to shove her over and see what happens. Years ago, I found my lucky rock on the mountain, black, big as a duck egg. Its irregular facets smooth like glass. On boring winter days back home, I used the rock to reflect a spot of sun or firefly onto the ground, wiggling it for the little ones to chase. Old Hollower's powers seem to involve light. Could I fool this group with a light trick? I stepped into the brightest spot in the room where sunlight poured through the window. I held the rock low down by my side. You, I said to the man who had just spoken. When he looked at me, I twisted the rock, reflecting light into his eyes. Ah, he said, squinting. And you, and you, and you. I said, reflecting that bright light directly into the eyes of 3 more people. I've marked you 4 with my magic light powers. That was just a flutter of magic. You don't want to feel my full wrath. I slipped the rock back into my pocket. The 4 that I had shined were shielding their eyes, afraid to look at me. I'm not going to blind you today, I smiled. Just be nice and you have nothing to worry about. All settled? All right, let's eat up. Everyone went back to their meals, whispering about the old Hollower bouncer. At the bar, Churn took out a wooden bowl and I took a step closer. He ladled not 1, but 2 whole scoops of stew into the bowl, topping it with a half a torn loaf of dark, nutty bread. I felt drool trickle down my mouth. Eat up, Mistress Spark, he said. The evening crowd is worse. I fell into the bar stool and shoveled in the first spoonful. The stew was very hot and full of venison, cabbage, and carrots cooked so long they fell apart on my tongue. A tear dropped from my eye into the bowl, adding a little more salt. I hope no one noticed the fierce Hollower bouncer crying. Once the noon meal passed, most of the folk went back to work in their shops and fields. I stayed on the bar stool. Now that I hadn't died of hunger, I wanted to die of shame. Really, Spark, old Hollower? When the sun began setting, Churn's girls lit the oil lamps, the fat burning smoky and bitter, and the tavern filled. Every table, every chair, the upper floor as rowdy as the lower. Hollower, people whispered, talking behind their hands. I felt like a bug in a bird's nest. A broad-shouldered woman stalked up to me, fists on her hips. Prove that you're an old Hollower, she said. Prove it how? It was too dark to do the light trick with my rock. At home, when the little one seemed especially sneaky, I would shout, I know what you're doing, even when I didn't. But they would get spooked and stop whatever mischief they had planned. So I leaned close and whispered to this woman, I know what you've done. And I pointed at her. The woman blushed, looked down, and hurried away. I exhaled. The crowd ate. They sang to a musician's flute. They danced and drank and shouted and shoved, and someone threw a punch. Stop that, I said, standing on my stool. The punchers backed down. For now, how long could I keep this up? Spark, come talk to Mr. Grunt, Churn said to me. Mr. Grunt owns coin for a month's worth of meals. Grunt was twice as tall as me and 4 times as big, bulging, with studded leather armor and a ridiculously huge war hammer. He hunched over his meal at the bar, stabbing chunks of stew with a pointed bone knife, drinking broth from the bowl and dribbling it into his beard. His beard was so filthy, I thought washing it with stew could only be an improvement. Mr. Grunt, I said in my stern voice, pay Mr. Churn. Grunt wiped his mouth with his sleeve, looked at me hard, and said, no. I pressed my hands to my stomach and felt as skinny as my own skeleton under my armor. I tried the pointing thing again. What? Said Grunt, scowling at my pointing finger. Pay up, I said, still pointing. Or what? I had no idea of what. But did he have lovely hair? Long, black, shockingly curly. Or your hair will fall out, I said. The tavern had gotten real quiet. Grunt leaned close to my face, his breath sticky with ale. I fought in the Southern Wars, Spark, he said, spittle flying with my name. I've seen real Hollowers, he said. My heart was beating like a jackrabbit's. I tried to smile as if I had all the confidence in the world, probably just managing to look like I needed to use the outhouse. Well, Churn asked me, how come his hair isn't falling out? Well, magic doesn't always work fast, I said. I pretended I did need to use the outhouse, but then I ran into the dark woods behind it. Running away again, Spark, I said to myself. Where would I go this time? Just 2 days from home, my food had run out. I hadn't managed to catch any game, no nuts, berries, or roots conveniently appeared to feed me. I'd spent the last 3 nights shivering, afraid the creaking of the woods was the sound of the ash raiders on the hunt. I couldn't go home, even if my brother Forge wouldn't kill me for stealing his armor, even if I could be happy in our crowded house again. Mama shouting at me to help her corral the little ones, make sure they didn't drown in the stream, wipe their noses at bottoms. I'd never survive the return trip without food. I looked at my boot, Forge's boot, actually, with an extra sock stuffed in the toe. I'd stepped on a dark ease plant. At home, when one of us was sick, Mama would give us dark ease tea to help us rest peaceful through the night. I went back into the Grinning Goat and served Grunt some stew myself. I may have crushed certain leaves into his bowl. This is your last meal at the Grinning Goat until you pay Churn every coin you owe. Grunt laughed. He stumbled home at closing time. I followed, sneaking from shadow to shadow. When I squeaked his door open, Grunt snored and rolled over in his bed. I was well practiced for this trick. I used to help shear Papa's sheep, but really it was a shame to cut off all that beautiful curly hair. The next morning, when Grunt entered the Grinning Goat, the music cut short. The laughing, shouting, and hollering silenced. Everyone stared at Grunt's bare scalp, as white as a winter rabbit. Grunt emptied his coin bag on the bar. Churn filled up a horn with frothy ale. Grunt turned to the room, lifted the horn, and shouted, "To Mistress Spark, our very own hollower," and the room erupted in cheers. I blushed. Some of the blush was shame. I promised Churn I'd help keep the Grinning Goat in line. It didn't matter that I was lying to get it done, did it? Grunt pulled me aside, bending in to reach my ear. "Will it grow back?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he said. "I kind of liked my hair." He rubbed his bare head and sniffed. For 2 more weeks, I bounced the Grinning Goat. By day, the patrons gave me little trouble. I would sit in the sun by the window, slowly drinking a horn of milk. I held my lucky rock, and its glassy darkness seemed not to reflect, but actually soak up the light. I made up stories about its origin. Was it really a dragon's eye? A shard from a hollow flame sword? An Ash Raider's black stony heart? I didn't use my rock to flashlight at troublemakers anymore. After Grunt, the only trick I needed was to point and holler some. I ate 3 meals a day, and I got used to not hearing Mama's voice yelling, "Spark, go check on your brothers. Wash the dishes. I need you to see which baby is stinky." In fact, I barely thought about home at all. Until one afternoon when in stalked the most frightening sight I'd ever laid eyes on. It was my big brother Forge, whose armor I was currently wearing and whose sword I'd scratched so badly trying to practice fight a rock that I'd stuffed it under my mattress out of embarrassment. His gaze was raking around the tavern, searching for me. I turned away and I started toward the back. When I heard "Spark," I froze. I could hear his footsteps stomping across the cavern's floor. Or maybe they were our brother Bluster's boots, since I was wearing his boots. Grunt stepped between me and Forge and said, "You want to mess with our bouncer?" He said. "Then you mess with Grunt. I'm her bouncer." My big brother never looked so tiny. I'd been closer to Forge than any of my brothers and sisters. We were the only ones born without a twin. "We lonely babies need to stick together," he used to say, until I stole his armor and ran away into the night. I. Grunt had unhooked his warhammer. "It's all right, Grunt," I said. "This is my brother. Excuse us a moment." I pulled Forge by his sleeve into a leaf-speckled sunlight beyond the tavern. He looked so achingly familiar, the dark brown eyes we all shared, the whiskers just growing on his lip and chin, the brow scar I'd given him years ago when playing with a wood sword. I wondered if I looked any different to him. "If you're going to kill me," I said, "do it here, please. Otherwise, Grunt will fight you and it'll get messy." Forge rolled his eyes. "Spark, what happened? Everyone assumed you'd gotten up in the night to use the outhouse and been carried off by a pack of wolves." "They did?" Being savaged by a wild beast was a nice, dramatic way to die. Though, of course, I'd prefer a valiant death in a hopeless but noble battle. Then I noticed my armor was missing, my precious armor that I'd sweated and worked for and rubbed with oil every single night. I'm sorry, Forge. Why'd you leave, Spark? He sounded more sad than angry. Why wouldn't I? The world is full of adventures, but I was stuck in that crazy crowded house watching over 9 little ones who were constantly fighting. So you're better off in this crazy crowded tavern watching over big ones who are constantly fighting? He had an excellent point. I'd always been plagued with warrior dreams. In one, I would stood atop a mountain, facing down an entire army, and I wasn't hopeless. In the dream, I'd won. So I left home, hoping I'd stumble into a marvelous adventure. The Grinning Goat had great stew, but wasn't I the same girl here that I'd always been? Come home with me, Forge said. I shook my head. My big brothers complained about their warrior training and farming chores. They had no idea what it was like being the oldest girl in a big family. But then he said, Mama misses you, Spark. She cries at night. Mama cried over me? I was the middle of 16 kids. I didn't even think she noticed I was gone. My eyes stung. I didn't want to cry, so I looked up at the sun to dry away the sting. Stop that, said Forge. I hate when you do that. It's creepy. Staring at the sun was supposed to turn anyone blind, but it never hurt my eyes. I loved how warm and strong the sun made me feel, like that fierce light could fill me up. I'll come home, I said in a real quiet voice so my voice wouldn't crack. I couldn't believe I was giving up my adventure already, but if Mama missed me, I'd always go home. Spark! Grunt came barreling out. Spark, the ash raiders are coming this way. Forge stood up from a tree stump so fast he tripped and stepped on my boots. His boots, actually. Did you say the ash raiders are coming this way? I asked. I was hoping Grunt had actually said something like, the trash traders are coming to pay, and I'd simply misheard. Yeah, he said, and my heart plunged into Forge's boots. Grunt kept looking over his shoulder as if afraid the raiders had already arrived. Some people just ran into town from Two Toads, the village to the north. The ash raiders burned two toads to the ground. The survivors said the raiders were moving south. That's terrible, I said. I guess this is the perfect timing for me to go home then. But you can't go now. Grunt's frown made his beard bushier. If we don't fight, they'll steal and burn everything. You're our best chance to beat them. I mean, you're an old hollower. A new hollower, I thought. And New Hollow had as much magic as cold oatmeal. Forge was frowning. Wait, what's all this about, old I backhanded Forge the stomach. Not now, we've got a crisis, I said. Grunt, how many armed fighters in the bendy stream? 24. Would that be enough? I wanted an adventure. I wanted a dramatic and glorious battle, but I didn't figure I'd find one so soon, or so dramatic and glorious. You won't stand alone against the raiders, said Forge. Count my sword among your own. That is, if Spark gives it back to me. That's nice, but Grunt blushed. Everybody voted at the Grinning Goat. They're mighty afraid of the ash raiders, and they'd all just rather you fought them yourself, Mistress Spark. You and your hollower brother. I stared at Grunt so hard, he took a step back, covering his head with his hands as if afraid I'd fry off the black fuzz that was just growing back. A lot of them were planning to throw me and Forge at the raiders. We'd be slaughtered. I marched back into the tavern, stood on the landing, and with my hands on my hips, I shouted, Quiet down! Do you hear me? Quiet down! I sounded so much like my mama that I gave myself the chills. All I needed was a wooden spoon to smack a few bottoms. You expect me and my brother to stop the ash raiders alone? You bunch of lazy, spoiled, good-for-nothing louses. I'm ashamed of the lot of you, ashamed. A few heads hung down, and I nodded, satisfied. I know you'd like us to magically make them go away, but we can't. They'll stand beside you, but you'll need to fight like mad. So let's get to work, or by my left toe, some heads will roll. And I followed up with some serious pointing. There was no way everyone was more afraid of little me than of the ash raiders. At my most fearsome, I'd shined a light in a few eyes. The ash raiders had burned dozens of towns to the ground, stolen livestock, and run the people off to starve in the wilderness. But the townsfolk listened to me anyway. What nice folk they were. I really didn't want to see their town burned. I was going to need more than a lucky rock and a couple of darkies' leaves. Defeating the ash raiders called for some serious tricks. With Churn and Forge's help, I assigned everyone a task, gathering weapons and tools, digging ditches, wrapping arrows with ale-dipped cloth, building a barricade on the north side of the town's main road. We gathered the outlying farm families in, and for 2 days, all the bendy streamers stayed in the center of town, taking turns at cooking, cleaning, digging, prepping, and watching. It was the morning when a girl, appropriately named Scout, came running from her scouting post. "They're here," she said out of breath. "There." That was all the warning we got. Over the horizon flowed the ash raiders. They rode horses and bulls. Their clothes were black. Their hair and faces were smeared with the ashes of towns they'd razed. Sunlight glinted off swords and hammers, axes and arrow points. I tried to count them all, but I got dizzy. The townspeople huddled behind our barricade of stacked wagons. I'm sure I wasn't the only one shivering under the bright sun. "Is this an adventure?" I whispered to Forge. "Yes," he said. "Is it supposed to be fun?" I asked. "Well, not at the moment." "Good," I said. "I was afraid I was doing it wrong." I stepped out in front. "I'm an old hollower. Retreat while you can." They kept coming. Well, it had been worth a try. A raider on horseback disappeared into the middle of the street. I pointed at him as if I made him disappear with my spectacular mage powers. Actually, I'd asked Grunt and others to dig random ditches all over the street, fill them with water, and sprinkle dirt on top for camouflage. Another rider plunged into a water hole, and another. I pointed. The raiders didn't seem fooled. They kept coming. One longbowman lit their arrows on fire and shot them in high arcs. "Ha ha!" I shouted. "Hear the light magic of Old Hollow." Some of our arrows hit the raiders' black clothing catching fire, but the rest of the raiders kept coming. I had only one trick left. I motioned to Forge and several others, and we lifted metal shields. I had assigned the children of the town to polish them till they were extra shiny. We tilted the shields, reflecting sunlight into the eyes of the ash raiders' front line. "I blind you," I shouted. "I blind you with my mage powers." Several broke off and fled, but the rest were not afraid. They shielded their eyes and kept coming. "Mr. Spark?" Grunt looked hopefully at me, his eyes small in Zeus' face. "Let me have a go." I didn't want to say yes. I wanted to be a real hollower and win the day, but I nodded. Grunt lifted his hammer and shouted. His 24 warriors ran forward, meeting the front line. Grunt took out 2 raiders in one swipe, but there were so many. I felt a tug on my shirt. Forge's shirt, actually. Scout was beside me, her big eyes pleading. "That's my papa," she said, pointing to a thin, grizzly bearded man with a rake standing with the non-fighters. "He says he'll have to fight since your powers weren't enough. But you won't make it, will you? You'll stop the raiders yourself, because you're a hollower, right?" Oh, why can't some lies be true? I gazed at the black wall of killers marching at us, and my gaze got lost in their vastness. Grunt's warriors would never be enough. "We have to retreat," I shouted back at the village. The warriors would give us time to get the rest of the townsfolk away. We had no choice but to abandon Bendy Stream. We started to run away from the raiders, but suddenly we were running towards them because more raiders were entering town from the other side. We were surrounded by a sea of black pushing us in. They wouldn't only steal all the gods and goods and burn the town, they'd burn the townsfolk inside it. I couldn't let that happen. I had to do something. I gripped my lucky rock in my pocket. I felt the sun above, so hot, the heat a slap on the top of my head. Forge ran back to me from the fighting. "I promised Mama I'd bring you home. Come on, we can't win here, Spark. They're as big as the night." Nothing can stop night but the sun. I climbed atop the barricade of wagons. I climbed and I climbed, and I lifted my lucky rock up. Could I make a lie real? "Spark!" I heard Forge calling. It was nice that he was afraid for me, but I didn't look down. The sun had always felt like kin, and I followed the hot, crazy nagging that the sun could help. I imagined not just reflecting the light, but pulling it into my rock. My fingers and palms burned, but it felt good, like clutching a mug of warm milk after playing in the snow. Spark, get down! The black rock brightened. A group of raider bowmen galloped toward the barricade. A glint of arrows, bowstrings pulled back, aiming at me. Leave, I shouted. They didn't leave. The raiders loosed their arrows. I loosed the sun. Light exploded from the rock and shot from my fingers. My white, too bright burst met the arrows midway, swallowing them up. The burst kept sizzling down the road and rolled over the raiders. I heard screeched of fear, their mouths screaming and stamping. Smoke rose from the raiders' black clothes. The ash fizzled from their hair. The first group fled. Grunt, get back, I shouted. He and his men retreated, and I pulled sunlight into the rock and shot it at the raider swordsmen. The burst crackled over their heads and chased them away. I aimed now for the raiders who were hedging in the town's front. Leave, I said, leave. By the time my white burst reached the remaining ash raiders, they were already fleeing. In moments, the last one had disappeared under the horizon. My eyes were dazzled. I blinked several times and looked down. The whole town was staring at me. Yep, said Grunt. That's what I saw the Hollowers do in the Southern Wars. Forge had climbed up beside me. His mouth was as wide open as his eyes. Before I left, Mama said she named you Spark because you had the spark. At the time, I didn't know what she meant. This was all feeling right. The waking world moving just like it did in my dreams. Forge and I didn't linger another day in Bendy's stream. I hugged and kissed all the Grinning Goat regulars. Churn sniffled as he gave me a week's worth of travel food. Grunt followed us to the edge of town and waved till I could no longer make out his fuzzy black head. Forge and I were going home. I couldn't stand to make Mama sad, but on the way, we would pass through Old Hollow just to say hello and maybe ask them about my lucky rock and how I was able to hold the sun. Thank you. That's this week's Read Aloud. And this book is available for takeout, checkout at the library. See you next Friday. If you have any suggestions of something you'd like to hear me read, you can email me at children@sopl.org. Thanks.